It is my great pleasure to introduce Tracy K. Smith, the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry of the United States of America, and the Roger S. Berlind 52 Professor in the Humanities at Princeton University, where she also directs the Creative Writing Program. Professor Smith is the author of 4 books of poetry: The Body's Question, which won the 2002 Cave Canem Prize; Duende, winner of the James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poets and an Essence Literary Award; Life on Mars, selected as a New York Times notable book and awarded the 2012 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry; and Wade in the Water, published in April of this year. Her memoir, Ordinary Light, was a finalist for the National Book Award for Nonfiction. She is also the recipient of many other prestigious fellowships and awards, a list too long to recite here. Many don't know that Professor Smith also wrote the libretto for A Marvelous Order, an opera about the conflict between 2 great urban planners and theorists, Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. I don't know if Jamin Rowan is here, but he probably just got super excited, okay? In their visions for what New York City should be and become. Her most recent book, American Journal, 50 Poems for Our Time, was published just this month by Grey Wolf Press and highlights the work of other poets, which represent a range of American poetic styles and forms and the varieties of American experience. For me, Professor Smith's poetry explores wide visions of what it means to be embodied in the present, but always accountable to the expanse of eternity. Bodies swimming in time-space, bodies which are wells of memory, nostalgia, trauma, and history, but also sites of hope, compassion, charity, and futurity. Like a wide wake rippling infinitely into the distance, she writes in the poem Everything That Ever Was. Everything that ever still is, somewhere, floating near the surface, nursing its hunger for you and me, and the now we've named and made a place of. It is not enough, her poem suggests, simply to attend to the personal, professional, and political pressures of the moment. Instead, we must see ourselves as the nexus of all those who have gone before us and as aspirants for the successes of those who will follow us. Professor Smith's poems and prose finally circle around back to family, to love, and to the need for just enough ordinary light to see that we are all full of stars. Please join me in welcoming Tracy K. Smith to Brigham Young University.
Thank you. There are 2 seats right there, if anybody wants them. I just vacated one, and there's another polite, empty one next to me. So, what a pleasure it's been just to spend the morning with you. I think I will share some poems from Wade in the Water. I'll start with some of the poems from the beginning of the book, which are thinking about the 21st century, what this moment, I guess, as yet in progress, is about, what challenges it offers us the opportunity to rise to, should we have the courage to do so. This is called Garden of Eden. A lot of the poems in this book that are thinking about things that are most mundane are also drawing titles from the Bible. I think that's a way of wanting to remind myself of this continuum that I'm obsessed with, this eternity that is ongoing, that we belong to. Garden of Eden. What a profound longing I feel just this very instant for the Garden of Eden on Montague Street, where I seldom shopped, usually only after therapy, elbow sore at the crook from a handbasket filled to capacity. The glossy pastries, pomegranate, persimmon, quince. Once, a bag of black beluga lentils spilt a trail behind me while I labored to find a tea they refused to carry. It was Brooklyn, my 30s. Everyone I knew was living the same desolate luxury, each ashamed of the same things, innocence and privacy. I'd lug home the paper bags, doing bank balance math and counting days. I'd squint into it or close my eyes and let it slam me in the face. The known sun setting on the dawning century. Annunciation. I feel ashamed, finally, of our magnificent paved roads, our bridges slung with steel, our vivid glass, our tantalizing lights, everything enhanced, rehearsed, a trick. I've grown old. I ache most to be confronted by the real, by the cold, the pitiless, the bleak, by the red fox crossing a field after snow, by the broad shadow scraping past overhead. My young son, eyes set at an indeterminate distance, ears locked, tuned inward, caught in some music only he has ever heard. Not our cars, our electronic haze, not the piddling bleats and pings that cause some hearts to race. Ashamed, like a pebble, hard and small, hoping only to be ground to dust by something large and strange and cruel. In more and more in my life, and I see it happening, evidence of it in my poems as well, I feel like the alternative to the maid, the beeping and flashing, even in its fascinating perfection, is nature, which to me is a sight of the holy, and it's happy and joyful making, but it's also terrifying. And I'll share a couple of poems that are thinking about that. This one is called The Angels. You have to wait for it, but it's there. The Angels. Two slung themselves across chairs once in my motel room. Grizzled, in leather biker gear, emissaries for something I needed to see. I was worn down by an awful panic, a wrenching in the gut, contortions. They sat there at the table while I slept. I could sense them with a deck of playing cards between them. To think of how they smelled, what comes to mind is rum and gasoline. And when they spoke, though I dared not look, I glimpsed how one's teeth were ground down almost to nubs, which makes me hope some might be straight up thugs. Young, slim, raw, who bounce and roll with fearsome grace, whose very voices cause faint souls to quake. Quake then, fools, and fall away. What God do you imagine we obey? Think of the toil we must cost them, one scaled perfectly to eternity. And still they come, telling us through the ages not to fear. Just those two, that once, and never again for me since, though there are there sightings, flashes, hints? A proud tree in vivid sun, branches swaying in strong wind, rain hurling itself at the roof, boulders, mounds of earth mistaken for dead does, lions in crouch, a rust-stained pipe where a house once stood, which I take each time I pass it for an owl. Bright whorl, so dangerous and near. My mother sat whispering with it at the end of her life, while all the rooms of our house filled up with night. This is a poem about the earth. The title sets up a metaphor. The world is your beautiful younger sister. Seeing her as seldom as you do, it doesn't change. The ire, the shame, the fists you must remember to smooth flat, just thinking what they did, what they promised, then took. Those men who offered to pay, to keep, the clan of them lording it over the others like high school boys and their kid brothers. Men with interests to protect and mute marble wives. Men who let her beam into their faces, watching her shoulders rise, her astonishing new breasts, making her believe it was she who gave permission. They plundered her youth, then moved on. Those awful, awful men. The ones whose wealth is a kind of filth. The first section of the book, where most of the poems I just read are housed, ends with what feels to me like a really, it ends with a poem that tells the story of something that happened to me. I was traveling in the South doing research on a new project that I'm working on that led me to have to explore a lot of sites of antebellum history. And many of them are commemorated and many aren't. Many are commemorated in ways that feel backwards to what they maybe should be. So plantations where you can go and have a wedding in, the style of the Grand South, where nearby sites of slave auctions go unmarked. I was really struggling with the conflicting feelings that came to me on this trip. Some of them were a sense of pride at descending from people who have been so instrumental to America and Americanness, who have fostered in some of the best moments of this country a reanimation of the concepts or principles of democracy, and I'm thinking of like the civil rights movement. People who have managed to survive many institutional and systematic attempts essentially to annihilate them. I feel a sense of joy at what has lasted, but I also feel hurt. And I attended a ring shout, which is a rhythmic tradition. The African American spirituals are sung, and there's a percussive element that signals all the way back to West Africa. I went to a performance, and a woman who was about to begin singing said to me, "I love you." And she gave me a hug. And this was the way she greeted every stranger that she met that night. And it was such a fortifying gesture. It wasn't fake. And it felt like the kind of healing that maybe could save this country. And so this is a poem that follows a lot of expressions of frustration, fear, worry that sit at the beginning of this book. Wade in the water. One of the women greeted me. "I love you," she said. She didn't know me, but I believed her. And a terrible new ache rolled over in my chest, like in a room where the drapes have been swept back. "I love you. I love you," as she continued down the hall, past other strangers, each feeling pierced suddenly by pillars of heavy light. "I love you," throughout the performance, in every hand clap, every stomp. "I love you" in the rusted iron chains someone was made to drag, until love let them be unclasped and left empty in the center of the ring. I love you in the water where they pretended to wade, singing that old blood-deep song that dragged us to those banks and cast us in. I love you, the angles of it scraping at each throat, shouldering past the swirling dust motes in those beams of light that whatever we now knew we could let ourselves feel knew to climb. Oh, woods. Oh, dogs. Oh, tree. Oh, gun. Oh, girl, run. Oh, miraculous many gone. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Is this love the trouble you promised? We spoke a bit during the Q&A about the poem that derives from Civil War letters and testimonies. It's called I Will Tell You the Truth About This. I Will Tell You All About It. It's a long poem, but I'd like to read two sections in which multiple voices operate as a kind of chorus. It's a poem that's written in the voices, the literal voices taken from letters and court depositions of African American soldiers who served during the Civil War, who had questions or appeals that they or their family members made to Abraham Lincoln, and who also, after the war, were seeking their pensions, but in many cases never got them. People who were born into slavery did not get birth certificates, marriage licenses, divorce papers, affidavits attesting to the fact that even if they changed their names after emancipation, they were the same people who served in the war under a different name, the name that had been given to them in slavery. So many people made these claims, and their descendants pursued them well into the 20th century. Excellent sir, my son went in the 54th Regiment. Sir, my husband, who is in Company K, 22nd Regiment, U.S. Colored Troops, and now in the Macon Hospital at Portsmouth with a wound in his arm, has not received any pay since last May, and then only $13. Sir, we, the members of Company D of the 55th Massachusetts Volunteers, call the attention of Your Excellency to our case. For instant, look and see that we never was freed yet, run right out of slavery, in to soldiery, and we hadn't nothing at all, and our wives and mother, most all of them, is a perishing all about, and we all are perishing ourself. I am willing to be a soldier and serve my time faithful like a man, but I think it is hard to be put off in such doggish manner as that. Will you see that the colored men fighting now are fairly treated? You ought to do this, and do it at once, not let the thing run along. Meet it quickly and manfully. We poor oppressed ones appeal to you and ask fair play. So please, if you can do any good for us, do it in the name of God. Excuse my boldness, but please. Your reply will settle the matter and will be appreciated by a colored man who is willing to sacrifice his son in the cause of freedom and humanity. I have nothing more to say, hoping that you will lend a listening ear to an humble soldier. I will close. Yours, for Christ's sake. I shall have to send this without a stamp, for I hain't money enough to buy a stamp. I am 60 odd years of age. I am 62 years of age next month. I am about 65 years of age. I reckon I am about 67 years old. I am about 68 years of age. I am on the rise of 80 years of age. I am 89 years old. I am 94 years of age. I don't know my exact age. I am the claimant in this case. I have testified before you 2 different times before. I filed my claim, I think, first about 12 years ago. I'm now an applicant for a pension because I understand that all soldiers are entitled to a pension. I claim pension under the general law on account of disease of eyes as a result of smallpox contracted in service. The varicose veins came on both my legs soon after the war, and the sores were there when I first put in my claim. I claim pension for rheumatism and got my toe broke, and I was struck in the side with the breech of a gun, breaking my ribs. I was a man stout and healthy, over 27 years of age when I enlisted. When I enlisted, I had a little mustache and some chin whiskers. I was a green boy right off the farm and did just what I was told to do. When I went to enlist, the recruiting officer said to me, "Your name is John Wilson." I said, "No, my name is Robert Harrison," but he put me down as John Wilson. I was known while in service by that name. I cannot read nor write, and I do not know how my name was spelled when I enlisted, nor do I know how it is spelled now. I always signed my name while in the Army by making my mark. I know my name by sound. My mother said, after my discharge, that the reason the officer put my name down as John Wilson was he could draw my bounty. I am the son of Solomon and Lucinda Sibley. I am the only living child of Dennis Campbell. My father was George Jordan, and my mother was Millie Jordan. My mother told me that John Barnett was my father. My mother was Mary Eliza Jackson, and my father, Reuben Jackson. My name on the roll was Frank Nunn. No, sir, it was not Frank Nern. My full name is Dick Lewis Barnett. I am the applicant for pension on account of having served under the name Lewis Smith, which was the name I wore before the days of slavery were over. My correct name is Hiram Kirkland. Some persons call me Harry, and others call me Henry, but neither is my correct name. I think poems are great because they allow you to go to the hard place in your mind, in your vocabulary, in your imagination, and struggle toward a larger view, a more generous view, a more rigorous view of experience. But it's also true that poems allow you to bear witness to the reality of being a person with shortcomings. So I'm going to read you 2 poems that do that. This one is called Beatific. I watch him bob across the intersection, squat legs bowed in black sweatpants. I watch him smile at nobody, at our traffic stopped to accommodate his slow going. His arms churn the air. His comic jog carries him nowhere. But it is as if he hears a voice in our idling engines, calling him lithe, swift, prince of creation. Every least leaf shivers in the sun, while we sit, bothered, late, captive to this thing commanding, "Wait for this man. Wait for him." Charity. She is like a squat old machine, off kilter but still chugging along the uphill stretch of sidewalk on Harrison Street. Handbags slung crosswise and, I'm guessing, heavy. And oh, the set of her face. Her brows profound tracks, her mouth cinched, lips pressed flat. Watching her bend forward to tussle with gravity. Watching the birth she allows each foot, as if one is not on civil terms with the other. Watching her shoulders braced, as if lashed by step after step after step. And her eyes' determination not to shift or blink or rise. I think I am you, one day out of 5. Tired, empty, hating what I carry but afraid to lay it down. Stingy, angry, doing violence to others by the sheer freight of my gloom. Halfway home, wanting to stop, to quit, but keeping going mostly out of spite. I'll close with what I wrote as a kind of poem of hope, a poem that was a challenge to myself to write a new myth, something that we could use at this moment. It's called An Old Story. We were made to understand it would be terrible. Every small want, every niggling urge, every hate swollen to a kind of epic wind. Livid, the land, and ravaged like a rageful dream. The worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. A long age passed, when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke. And then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals long believed gone crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color. Thank you.